I'm Walt, and this is Delta Astrophotography. And one of the most common questions I get about my Milky Way videos is, tell me again, why on earth are you taking photographs with the lens cap on? Well, these are called dark frames, and it's a very common technique in all forms of astrophotography. And I guess I might have briefly explained this in past videos, but today I'm really gonna break it down and not just talk about it, but show you up close and personal in some images, what they look like taken with and without dark frames, using photos I've taken over the past few weeks. So join us in today's episode of So dark frames are a part of a process we do in astrophotography called stacking, where instead of just taking one photograph of our subject, we frame it up and take the same photo over and over and over again. And then using special astrophotography stacking software, we combine all those images. And what that does is it basically enhances the detail, gives us more signal, but at the same time, it looks at each photo and it can see the random salt and pepper kind of grainy noise, and it's moving from photo to photo, and it can see that, well, that's not the foreground, that's not the sky, that's moving between photos, and it averages it out. It's completely gone. So what you end up with is a final image with lots more detail and a lot less noise. Now, there's one kind of noise that it does not get rid of, and that's because when we're doing astrophotography, we are actually taking long exposures, and when we do that, our sensor tends to heat up. And when it heats up, it creates another kind of noise called thermal noise, and it results in things like hot pixels and kind of splotchiness all over your image. And the difference between that and like the grainy salt and pepper noise is this thermal noise and the hot pixels, they're in the same spot in each frame. Never moves around. So the stacking software can't really tell that that's noise. It actually thinks it's part of the photo. So the way we get around that is, of course, taking dark frames. Dark frames will be pretty much an image of that thermal noise, those hot pixels, which are basically like red and green and purple splotchy. Looking places all over your image. So how do we take these dark frames? It's pretty easy. As soon as you get done shooting your light frames of the Milky Way, just take your lens cap, put it right back on your camera. Keep your camera settings the exact same and take a few more photographs, and that's all there is to it. Now, the reason you want to take them right after your Milky Way shots is because dark frames are temperature sensitive. Sometimes those hot pixels and that noise won't show up the next night if the temperature outside is different. So you want to take them the same night, right after you take your light frames. Now, how many do you take? Well, that's kind of up to how many light frames you took. If you only took about 4 light frames, then I would probably only take about 4 dark frames. But if you took 60 light frames, I'd take at least half of that, 30. If you took 30 light frames, I'd take at least 10 dark frames. You know, don't take quite as many dark frames as you did lights, but somewhere around half, unless you took a very small number, then about the same. Like I said, if you took 4 light frames, take about 4 darks. So basically take at least 3 to 4 dark frames no matter what kind of project you're stacking. Now, in order to stack your photos, you're gonna need some dedicated astrophotography stacking software, especially software for stacking nightscapes if you're doing Milky Way stuff. Now, I use this free piece of software for Windows called Sequitur. If you have a Mac, you're gonna wanna use Starry Landscape Stacker, which unfortunately is not free. It looks like it's going for $40 US. Now, I don't personally have a Mac, but I have installed this on my girlfriend's MacBook, and it was incredible. I loved how it worked, but I have a Windows PC, so this is what I'm going with. It's super easy to use. In order to stack, we'll just go over here and click Star Images, open them up, navigate to a folder
I'll just select all my Milky Way images I took that night, open them up, and if you took dark frames in Sequitur, it'll be noise frames right here. Click that, and I've put all my dark frames in this one folder called Darks. Add all of those, open them up, select where we want to save our final photo. I'll just save it in here called Stack. We'll just call this Milk for YouTube. Now we have to tell the software the difference between the foreground and the sky. So right here under Accumulation, I'm going to go down here and click Freeze Ground. And right under that, where it says Sky Region, I'm going to click that. That's going to give me this little brush right here, and I just paint over the sky. If I make a mistake like this, I can just right-click and erase it. I can change the brush size with the scroll wheel on the mouse. There we go. Now it knows the difference between the foreground and the sky. The sky is going to move between photographs, so it needs to know the difference. And that's it. We can just hit start and it'll stack our image. Before we jump into the computer and see what the dark frames actually do, just want to let you know that every single photo was taken with a Canon 6D stock DSLR camera and a Rokinon 24mm f1.4 lens. I'm briefly going to take you out to where I shot the images and go over the camera settings.
Camera settings, yay!
It's good to hear you, old friends. The camera settings that I used to take each image. So the first night was a few weeks ago, kind of around the end of June. It hadn't been clear for 3 months maybe. Finally, went outside one night, looked clear, even though the weather said it was not going to be clear. So I just got out here as fast as possible. This is my little practice spot. Not the greatest foreground, but there's no trees, no phone poles, no power lines, no traffic, no street lights. It's a nice little place to practice. And since I knew I could probably only have 30 minutes to an hour before clouds came back, I just brought the camera and the tripod and nothing else. And so what I shot with, the camera settings, is ISO 800, aperture f1.4, and a shutter speed of 15 seconds. Unfortunately, almost immediately after I started shooting, the clouds came in, but let's take a look and see what we got anyway.
Here is our single image from night one. I've got it opened up in Lightroom. As you can see, it got kind of cloudy, but there's still some Milky Way at the top. But the foreground's pretty dark. So we're gonna brighten that up just by going over here to shadows and lifting the shadows a good bit, so we can actually see what's going on in the photograph. There we go. Now zoomed out like this, it doesn't look too bad, but let's zoom in. And we can see that the foreground is extremely noisy, grainy. There's not a whole lot of detail in these plants. Zoom in on the sky, a lot of noise, just kind of that salt and pepper grainy noise up there. There's not a whole lot of hot pixels because this is only a 15-second exposure, but there are a few, and these can usually be gotten rid of with a clone stamp tool or an AI remove tool. But these days, with modern versions of Lightroom, this is not too hard to get rid of all this noise. All we have to do is scroll down to the Detail tab right here, and they have AI Noise Reduction. I'm just gonna click on that. Now we've got a little preview window here. If we click it, we can look at before and after. Look at all that horrible noise it got rid of. We're just gonna go ahead and click Enhance and see what it actually does. This actually does take a minute or two. It's kind of a slow process, depending on your processor and RAM and all that. That actually took about 45 seconds. Now let's zoom back in on our foreground. And as we can see, that's a lot cleaner. I can see a good bit more detail in these soybeans right here. Let's look at the sky. That's quite clean as well. But one thing I don't like, if we kind of look at the soybeans kind of in the background here, that doesn't really look natural. It kind of starts to look like rolling grass. I don't know, it's just like all the details back there, they've gone away. Let's look in the corner. It didn't really get rid of those hot pixels, it just kind of made them white. But all in all, that's not too bad. There's only one problem with this. It only works with RAW files. So if you've stacked an image and it spits it out as a TIFF file, which most stacking software does, you cannot use this plugin. Hopefully one day they'll change that where it can work on TIFF files, but as of right now, this only works with raw files. I know that there's some paid AI noise reduction software out there, but we're trying to do things for as cheap or as free as possible, at least on Windows, so that's what I'm working with right now. But for a single image, that does not look half bad. I could go ahead and finish it off by clicking the masking tool right here, selecting sky, and I can just bring down those highlights, bumping up the exposure just a touch, bring down the blacks, trying to just bring out a little more detail in that Milky Way, increase the contrast, come back to my main edit window. I'm gonna cool down the temperature, bump up the dehaze a bit, add a little vibrance. I don't like all that yellow, so we'll come down to our color mixer and bring down the yellows and the greens a little bit, because deep, rich green is not very natural for a dark nightscape that's supposed to be taken in the middle of the night. And just bump up my overall exposure just a touch. And there we have an actual decent looking Milky Way that's pretty clean, but I've had to use noise reduction to clean it up, and it kind of softens the image and takes away from the detail, especially kind of in these far away areas. So this is where we want to use stacking. So instead of taking away detail to clean it up, we want to add detail. So for the next night, let's do some stacking.
So on night 2, I got lucky again. There were no clear skies in the forecast, but at around 11 o'clock at night, I walked outside and sure enough, it was perfectly clear. So once again, I hauled ass out here. And this time I decided, if the weather permitting, I was gonna take more than just one exposure. So I packed my intervalometer that'll allow me to take as many exposures as I want without ever having to touch the camera. Pointed the camera right back there at the Milky Way, kept the camera settings the same as the other night, which is ISO 3200, an aperture of f1.4 and 15-second exposures. But this time I used the intervalometer to take 60 of those exposures. I'm gonna use all 60 of those to stack them together and get more detail out of both the foreground and the sky. So instead of just one 15-second exposure, that's 15 times 60. That's about 900 seconds or 15 minutes. 15 minutes of light from that direction as opposed to 15 seconds. Of course, when I was done, before I packed up, took my lens cap, put it back on the camera, kept all my camera settings the exact same, took the intervalometer and programmed it to take 30 more photographs. These are my dark frames. And after that, I called it a night, which I really shouldn't have, because even though the weather predicted clouds all night, it's actually the clearest night of the year. Oh well, it happens.
Okay, here's a single image from night 2. This is before I've stacked anything. I've already kind of brightened the image a little bit so you can see all the details. There's less clouds in the sky and there's a little less light pollution coming off those clouds, so the foreground's even darker on this night. And let's kind of zoom in and look at it. Look how much less detail. That just looks horrible. I can hardly see any details in these soybeans. The sky is super grainy, super noisy. Now let's switch over to what it looks like after I've stacked it, but I have not included dark frames in this stack. This is going to be a stack with no dark frames. Okay, here's our stack with no dark frames. Let's first look at the foreground. As you can see, it's a lot cleaner. There's a lot more detail in those soybeans. There's no salt and pepper grainy noise in the sky. It looks a whole lot better. Just loving the amount of detail, especially that it added in the dark foreground. The sky was pretty bright, so there weren't a whole lot of problems there, but it's really the foreground that you really start to see a lack of detail with just one exposure. This looks great except for one thing. Look at all of these hot pixels. They're everywhere. The more images we stack, the more of these we're gonna get. And the stacking software just thinks they're part of the photo because they stay in the same spot between each photo. And if we zoom way in, it's worse than you think. They're everywhere. The image is really, really splotchy. Now let's look at a photo of an actual dark frame. Here's a dark frame. I've actually brightened it a little bit so you can see what's going on in there. And if we zoom in, we see all our hot pixels, but we also see all this color splotchiness. This is in your photos. Now let's look at our stacked images with no darks and compare it to a dark frame, and we'll see how the hot pixels line up. We got our stacked image with no darks on the bottom left and the dark on the bottom right. Let's zoom in on these two hot pixels. Look, there they are in the dark frame. Everywhere we zoom in and see a hot pixel, we can also see the exact same ones in the dark frame. So now let's see what it really looks like once we've stacked with dark frames as well. Let's zoom in, and as we can see, that is as clean as can be. This is zoomed in almost pixel level, so it doesn't quite look that clean, but if we zoom out a reasonable amount, look at that. There are absolutely No hot pixels, no kind of red splotchiness. Not as clean as can be. We can go and look at the sky. No problems up there. Very, very clean. Let's go back down and check out one more time. Let's compare everything. Just look at all these hot pixels in this frame in the bottom left, and then in the top right. Just hardly any of that is there. And if we zoom way in, it's almost red dotted splotchiness. It's all over the place. It's almost non-existent in the photo with the dark frames.
For my last photograph, it wasn't even that long ago, the 4th of July to be exact, and it was definitely clear that night, but there was a lot of moon out, so I didn't think I was going to do any Milky Way shooting. Instead, I went home and used narrowband filters in my telescope to photograph the Crescent Nebula. But after I got my telescope set up and running, I decided to take the dog on a little drive, watch the moon set, and once the moon went down around 1:30 in the morning, I drove past this area right here, saw this thing in the background with the Milky Way coming up right above it, and I knew I had to take that photograph. And I just happened to have my entire Milky Way rig in the car just in case there was a moment like this. That included my Move Shoot Move Nomad star tracker. So I got out and set up. Because I'm using a star tracker, I could drop my ISO way down to 800 and change my aperture to f2.2, and I can do 2-minute exposures. But since I'm using a star tracker, I had to do 2 separate exposures. I had to shoot the sky with the tracker on and the foreground with the tracker off, and then I had to blend the two later. So what I ended up doing is using the same camera settings that I just mentioned, ISO of 800, aperture f2.2, and I used the intervalometer connected to my camera to take 2-minute exposures. So ultimately, what I ended up doing was 4 2-minute exposures of the sky, then I turned the tracker off, 4 2-minute exposures of the foreground, then I put the lens cap on and did 4 more 2-minute exposures for my dark frames. Now, just a side note here, this took from the time I set up the tripod, then polar aligned the tracker, focused, and then shot all my frames, including dark frames, and then tore down. That took me over 30 minutes. And I've had a lot of practice doing this. If you're a beginner, it could take a lot longer. So if you're in a dark sky site, you've got that one night to photograph all kinds of shots with the stars in the background, I don't really recommend this method, even though I still think it's probably the most clean and detailed. It's just, you're gonna spend way too long on one image. But if you've got the whole night to kill, all the time in the world, this is the way to go. So let's get on the computer and see how these turned out.
Now we're on to night 3, where I used a lower ISO and much longer exposures. This is a stacked image, but without the dark frames. We zoom in, we can already see there's so much more detail in this foreground already, just because we used the lower ISO. But if we zoom in, once again, we see all the red splotchiness. We see purple and yellow and red hot pixels all over the place, and it just looks like red and purple grains of sand all over the entire image. Obviously, the stars are trailed in the sky, but you can still see strange little hot pixels all over the place. I don't even know what to think about that. Look at the grass here. Just looks pretty bad. I would not want to blow that up in a print and show that off. Here's a stacked photo of the sky with no darks, and as you can see, there's a few hot pixels. Yep, they're definitely in here. There's some more right there. As you can see, we've got the top of that heavy machinery tractor thing right in here. It looks very blurry because the star tracker was on. That's why we take 2 separate photos of the foreground and the sky. Now let's look at the image stacked with dark frames. Here's our foreground. Zoom in. And there are significantly less dark frames. There's not a lot of red splotchiness. It just looks so much better. I'm not saying that the hot pixels are completely gone, because I found a couple here. Those can be easily clone stamped out, but they're not just dominating the entire image, especially the red ones. That just looks so much cleaner, so much better. Let's have a look at the sky. Here's the tracked sky stacked with dark frames. I'm not seeing any hot pixels at all in here. That's just as clean as can be, almost no noise. It's not bad for a 2-minute exposure, especially on a hot summer night. Let's check out that foreground one more time, because that's usually the darkest area that has the most noise. And yeah, that's an extremely, extremely clean image. Now, I probably wouldn't have the foreground this bright. I'm just brightening it up to show you all the details.
Well, I hope that cleared up the mystery on why I go out and take photos with the lens cap on in Milky Way photography. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end. And for my long-term subscribers and watchers, sorry I haven't been around for a while, but as you might know, it's been one of the worst years for astrophotography all over the world, and I'm just so glad that it seems like the long winter and spring rains might be finally slowly coming to an end. I really want to thank my patrons on Patreon for sticking around and bitching with me about how horrible the weather is and showing our experiments to each other on Discord. You guys have been great. And if you are not a patron and you want to support this channel, help it stay alive in these dark, cloudy, miserable times, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And if you want to support this channel for absolutely free, well, just don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment down below. Well, that about does it for today. I've been Walt. This is Delta Astrophotography. I'm going to get out of here. As always, stay spacey, clear skies, watch out for snakes, and I'll see you in the next one.